Welcome to the UCLA Library. I'm Gary Strong, I'm a university librarian, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you all here this afternoon. I'm pleased particularly to welcome you this evening for a special opportunity to hear Harry Brant Chandler discuss his recent book, Dreamers in Dream City. Dreamers is a stunning collection of portraits and biographies of some of the most colorful and accomplished people in the City of the Angels that have ever been produced. We are honored to have Harry here tonight for our first Library Associates author reading in this academic year. Harry's a fifth-generation Angelino, a member of the Chandler family of Los Angeles Times fame. He's a graduate of the prestigious Phillips Andover Academy and a graduate of Stanford University. For almost 30 years,
and
he was...
UCLA.
And UCLA.
You get your plug there.
So they didn't feed me all the poop?
They did feed me.
For almost 30 years, Harry was a media executive who worked with companies such as 20th Century Fox, Showtime, and CBS. Recently, he began to devote his talents to art and photography. His distinctive portrait of Los Angeles in Dreamers is a result of his experiences in media blended with his passion for photography. His reading tonight will focus on 54 men and women who represent the dreamers of Los Angeles, ranging from immigrants to billionaires, unknowns to the world famous, surfers to movie makers, and quacks to rocket scientists, to name but a few. But I'll let him tell you more about that, and I hope you will be willing to answer a question or two when that all comes to an end. So please join me in welcoming Harry Brant Chandler.
Thank you, Gary. Contrary to what Gary promised, this is not a reading. I'm not going to read one word from the book. What I am going to do is talk about how it came to pass, and I've picked out a few colorful characters to talk about tonight. Videographer wants lights on, so it's... So I spent most of my career in film, television, newspaper, and the internet. And growing up in a household as I had, I was exposed to a lot of great people over my life. I sat on Walt Disney's lap as a child. I had presidents at our house. So I was one of the fortunate few who had a pretty good overview about Southern California. So 3 years ago, I got back into photography. I shot a lot at Stanford and at Phillips Academy, and thought it'd be fun to kind of resurrect my photography career a little bit. And at the same time, I've been a student of Southern California history for most of my life. I collect books, I read books. So I came up with this idea about dreamers, about people who aren't just sort of the best lawyer, the best doctor, the best accountant, but who take a look at their lives and the lives around them and think about something very special and pursue it. Now, many of us think dreamers is one of those things that your grandfather might have said, oh, he's just a dreamer. I think for Southern California, it actually is a badge of honor. One of the words that I use in the book, or one of the phrases, is, I think we're at the epicenter of invention. And there are some reasons for that. Let's go back to the 1880s when this city was first settled. Southern California had a reputation, and it still does, as the place to go to try new things. People wouldn't criticize you if you came here and tried something new. You had the weather, you had the land to try building, you had the influx, even back then, of diverse groups of people. When I was in prep school in New England, I had never lived outside of Southern California, and I was kind of shocked to be in the Boston area and find how sort of conservative, even people who weren't conservative were. Meaning, you would try something new, you talk about something new, and they were like, we don't really do that here. And I think all of us in this room, I assume, are Southern Californians, and I think we're all proud of that heritage, and we're proud of the accomplishments of this city and what it has created. So, in thinking about these dreamers, I went to a number of people for advice. One of the first I visited was the eminent California historian Kevin Starr, who's written, was it 8 or 9 books now? His newest is just out. And all of them have the word dreams in it. So I thought, what a perfect fit. So I'd never met Kevin, and we got to know each other, and his photos in the book as a researcher, not as a dreamer. And this is one of the quotes I used, which I liked. So I talked to Kevin, I talked to friends at the LA Times, I talked to just about everyone I had dinner with over the last 2 or 3 years, and said, all right, who's out there that you're impressed by? Because I wanted a mix of famous, infamous, and unknown. I wanted people that were in all different professions. And what I ended up with is about 56 folks, about half from the past and half from the present. These are the categories that I ultimately put the groups in. So as you can see, I chose from a variety. They're not all Hollywood. They're not all sort of downtown types. And I think few cities could boast that range of innovators and dreamers that those categories speak to. In the book, there are biographies. I wrote essays for each of the chapters, thinking about what does it mean to be a builder, what does it mean to be a discoverer. Shared a lot of stories. Most historians obviously have to write from a sense of third person. My publisher encouraged me to do the opposite. So there's a lot of anecdotes from my own and my family's history here. Bill Gross, Frank Gehry, a lot of them contributed some great quotes, and these are just a few that you like. This is the Bill Gross who, he's in the book. He's runs a company called Idea Lab. He's birthed about 150 companies in the last decade. One of which was called GoTo, which became Overture, which I was executive vice president of, and which allowed me after its internet or its IPO to have the time to write this book. So I sort of acknowledge Bill for starting that company. One of the decisions I made early on is when I went back into time and said, okay, people like Amelia Earhart are important to include here. But as a photographer, I was also interested in showing off my skills, and I took photos of all of the people who are alive. For the people who are deceased, like Amelia, what I did is I tried something a little different. You don't see this too often. So that's the original photo. That's the photo that's in the book. So I got rid of the audience, I got rid of the bench, and made some interesting design choices for her dress and shoes, and accessorized her, I thought, quite well. I never found out what color this plane was because it was never photographed in color, so I made some choices there as well. So what you'll see in the book is it's vivid color. To me, California, Southern California in particular, is about color. It's about high chromas. So everything, those of you who are looking at the title or the cover of the book, saturated morning light. To me, that was important to talk about dreamers and to show them. So I'm going to talk about four people today. One builder, one activist, and 2 folk heroes, because they're sort of colorful and fun. Anybody recognize this man? Andy Lipkiss. So Andy is, of all the people that I included in the book, was the most fascinating to meet. Deliberately, the photographer made choices to make Andy in focus and his background not. Thank you for pointing that out. Here's Andy's backstory. He's 15 years old at summer camp in Big Bear. And as one of the projects up in the camp, they're noticing that the pine trees up on Angeles Crest in that area and Big Bear are dying because of the smog in the 50s. So the camp gets this little idea to have the kids do some tree planting. And they plant a dozen trees, and Andy kind of learns that trees actually not only are help abate the smog, but they serve a number of other sort of watershed and oxygen-producing benefits. So he's 15 years old. Had a good summer doing that. That's about as much as he thought of it. At this point, there's no dream. There was just an experience. Cut to, he's in Sonoma for college, and there's an article about the Forest Service having 8,000 seedlings that it had no use for in the state and was going to turn them under. And Andy goes, God, we need trees planted. You know, that shouldn't happen. But he's a student living in a dorm, has no, or in an apartment building off campus, has no ability to, no money, no. But he starts to sort of stir up things, and he writes a bunch of letters, and before he knows it, there's a reporter at the LA Times who picks up on this, writes a Metro story, Andy versus the bureaucracy, and two or 3 days later, 8,000 seedlings show up on the front of his apartment building, delivered by the government. Now, this is where the fun begins, because if you've ever planted a tree, you know that there's a lot of things that have to happen. So Andy really didn't know this at this moment, but he quickly found out that he had about 3 days to get 8,000 seedlings in milk cartons, watered and stored in cold storage. Not an easy thing to do when you're in school. So he goes to Dairy Queen, he goes to the dorm, he goes to the president's house, he gets every milk carton he can find, replots these things into milk cartons. Then he goes back to the same places and says, I need your refrigerator. Right? Literally had the Dairy Queen's refrigerator storing trees up in Sonoma. So he's through the first crisis, how to save these trees. Doesn't have any money to plant them, doesn't know what, beyond a week or two of asking favors. And his dad gives him a call and says, Andy, get on a plane, get down here quick. And he goes, what's that? He goes, I don't know, you got to come, you got to come. So he comes down there, and there are bags of mail from the LA Times stories with thousands and thousands of dollars of checks. So he rented trucks, he and his college buddies planted the trees, and this is where Tree People, which is the #1 urban forestry program, started. What a great dream. Andy is pictured in this photograph up in his headquarters up in Mulholland that was under construction when I photographed this. It's now completed. Andy's mission is really moved way beyond just trees. And one of the things I found most fascinating about him, first of all, his secretary said, all right, he's only got 10 minutes, he's got meetings, got to get in and out. It was an hour and 10 minutes before Andy finally stopped talking, ignoring the 11th beep of his cell phone to go catch up with the meetings that he'd been missing. He's a passionate advocate. He thinks about Los Angeles and Southern California, not just about trees. By the way, he planted, just during the Olympics, 1 million trees. He got the whole Army Corps of Engineers helping. I mean, it was just, this guy has really accomplished a lot. But he thinks about our water, how much of the energy of our state goes to transporting our water. He's doing pilot projects with high schools now where they're essentially putting aquifers under the football fields and the playgrounds to let the water, to collect water, using huge big trees in some cases on the sides. Other times it's just sort of gravel fill, working with the Department of Water and Power on these projects. So it's he's really moved way beyond just let's plant some trees in the forest near Los Angeles. A great example of an activist, a great example of a dreamer. This is Mama Buff, my grandmother Dorothy Buffum Chandler, in her little blue weekend car, which I'll tell you about in a sec. So this was not your normal grandmother. This was not a sit-on-your-knee kind of lady who had you over and took care of you. I don't think once she babysitted any of the grandkids. Most of the time I saw her was Christmas dinner. She lived in a very big house in Hancock Park. Looked like the White House, big columns, pillars. We had finger bowls before dinner, crystal. Each of the children had to give toasts, each of the grandchildren. So I learned very early on that with, what do we had, 8 or 9 grandkids, if you waited to the end, you had nothing original to say. So maybe the reason I can stand up here and hold my own is I learned early on, get up quick, say what you're going to say, and capture the moment. Dorothy's backstory was she grew up in Long Beach. Her father was a dry merchant. You remember Bufham's department store? That was her family. She met my grandfather, Norman, at Stanford. Came back, married him. He was, his father, Harry, was the then publisher, and eventually Norman took over the LA Times. Dorothy, this was sort of in the 40s, was expected to be sort of the corporate social wife, go to parties, have teas. And as she was raising her 2 children, that sort of role-playing got to her. She had a nervous breakdown. She went into a residential program, and for I think a month or 2 with this one doctor really gave her the confidence that she had the ability to do more than just be the corporate wife. So she came out with sort of a new confidence. Her first project was, I forget the years, but Hollywood Bowl had been going for many, many years, and suddenly people running it just weren't doing a great job, and it went bankrupt, and they closed in the middle of the season. And there were talks about bulldozing it and figuring out something else to do. So she was always a classical music buff, but had never really done any kind of big volunteer activity like this. So she got involved, became the president of the bowl, put a campaign together that summer to resuscitate it, raised enough money to reopen it for the following season, put it on its feet. That success led to the much bigger one. So her belief in the 40s and 50s was every great city needed a really great cultural home. And Los Angeles in those days had very small museums, sort of temporary places for the symphony. It was not exactly a world-class cultural city. So Buff, as people called her, came up with this idea that they needed not just a theater, but a whole arts complex, and persuaded the supervisors to donating a piece of Bunker Hill land, and then set out to build a group to raise the $18 million to do the initial construction. The stories, and this is all before my time, I was much too young to remember the fundraising, but her character, which is what I remember, was a very strong lady, kind of regal, a little imperious even at times. And her accomplishment in putting the music center together was severalfold. One, she did what most men hadn't done, which was really twist arms in a very effective way. She tore up checks from people and saying, "You can do better." She visited people that had never given to Southern California. She got the West Side Jewish community to give to downtown, which had never happened. She got the Pasadena set, who had never given to downtown, to work with them. So she kind of brought the city together, raised this money, and the rest was history. I remember the opening day. I was somewhere in grade school, and classical music was not quite my thing. And it was a very long-winded day with speeches and everything. And I snuck a portable transistor radio into my pocket so I could listen to KRLA rock and roll at the end during the concert, only to find out that the music center was built so well you couldn't get any FM reception. Just as well. Imagine what my grandmother would have done to me. Later on, after her husband died, Norman died when I was in college, and I came back and was living not far from Buff. And one of the great thrills of my life was toward the last decade of her life, I became her main escort. So when she wanted to go to the music center, she would call me up, because she was sort of old school, didn't like going out to dinner or going out to a music center unaccompanied. So I was the grandson who could drive her there, and she could show me off to her blue rinse set, as I used to call it. But it was quite a thrill. I was in my 20s, and so on one particular evening, it was my wife was accompanying me, and we had dinner before the concert with Dorothy and Zubin Mehta, the conductor. And in her later years, Dorothy, having had the success she had, didn't really have the check and balance that she had when she was married. No one was sort of saying, "That's enough, Buff. You know, settle down." And so, like many people who've been in positions of success and power, she hadn't really had anyone to say no to her, kind of cross her. So I think I was the first to do this, and here's what happened. So in the middle of dinner, she made some comment about today's women were such and such and such. Well, here she is. She's, let's call it, almost 80 at that time. Probably not in touch with today's women, and certainly during the 70s, kind of the new generation of women. And so I made the decision, not sure why, to not let that comment pass. And particularly since my wife is fairly liberal and would probably kick me under the table if I hadn't. So I said, no, I think you're wrong. I think you're really not quite perceiving that correctly. I don't remember my exact words, but I certainly put a stop to her conversation. Well, she suddenly looked over at me, stopped talking for the rest of the dinner. As we walked down to the concert hall, didn't say a thing to me. The entire concert wouldn't even look me in the eye. And I thought, oh no, I've really done it now. My relationship with my grandmother is really, really over. So I'm driving on the way home, and our routine at the end of the evening was I would drop her off at the front, her help would open the door, I'd say goodnight to her, I wouldn't come in. And my wife knew to kind of stay away, because she was like staying in the car, because when the imperious Dorothy was on a tear, you don't want to get close. So at the end of the night, I'm ushering her to the door, and she suddenly turns around, looks me in the eye for the first time since this comment, and she's crying. And I thought, oh no, now I've really done it. And suddenly she said, "Harry, you're the only one that can tell me the truth. Thank you." And I was like, escaped that one. Anyway, a very remarkable lady who had a very big dream and brought it to life. All right, who knows this man? Anybody recognize? One of the most colorful characters from Los Angeles is passed. Many of you may have seen the movie that Burt Lancaster starred in called The Rain Man. This was The Rain Man, the true story. Charlie Hatfield, grew up in the Midwest, 1880s, came out to Southern California, attended Pasadena High School, and read a book about a popular theory of the time called pluviculture, that how man could create chemicals that would rise up and create clouds. So Charlie thought, I'm living in this very arid big city, making clouds could be a good thing. 1904, we were in the middle of a 30-year drought. the churches came together and declared January, I forget, 20th, a day where all the churches had to pray for rain. It was that severe. Some of the farmers had seen the ads that Charlie and his promotional partner took out in the local papers saying, I can create rain. So some of the ranchers said, well, let's give him $100 if he can succeed. 2 days after the churches prayed, it rained an inch. Charlie's career had started. Now, weather services said, hey, that was a storm we knew was coming, but Charlie's promotion led you to believe Charlie brought that storm to life. 1906, I believe, the drought had continued. Now it was the LA City Council's turn to hire Charlie. Meanwhile, he'd been working not just in Southern California, ultimately across his career. He worked all across the West, Brazil. He was making rain. So the way he did it is he mixed 3 chemicals. Of course, he wouldn't tell you what. He would build these huge evaporation pans, put them up on towers on Mount Lowe and another strategic place, let them evaporate, and said that the clouds would be seeded and rain would come. So City Council authorizes a few bucks. Sure enough, within 2 or 3 weeks, the rain comes. So Charlie gets paid. He goes on to more and more careers. The highlight of his thing was 1915, another period of drought. This time it was in San Diego. San Diego has these reservoirs up in the hills that this main reservoir that feeds San Diego hadn't been full for decades. So most of the city council were smart enough to know that you can't just create rain, but they said, look, we need rain. That's our biggest problem. We got farms failing, businesses failing. So they offered Charlie $15,000, a lot of money, 1915, if he could fill the reservoir. That way they figured it's not just a little rain. Filling the reservoir, we would be heroes if that happened. So Charlie hauls his gear down to San Diego, builds 3 or 4 of these evaporation towers. Sure enough, now Charlie was smart enough to know you only build these in the rainy season. You don't build them in the middle of the summer. You don't build them in the fall. You build them in January, February, March, which is what he did. But on this occasion, not only did it rain, it poured, it flooded. They had the biggest flood in San Diego history. Buildings were washed out, bridges wiped out, roads destroyed. It rained for like 2 weeks straight. Reservoir filled. It stopped for a few days, rained again. It rained so much that the city council reneged on its offer because it said they had hundreds of thousands of dollars of property damage because of the flood he caused. Historians still call it Charles Hatfield's flood. So, great story. This is Charlie's photo. I colored him and put new backgrounds on him, but he appeared at the premiere of The Rain Man, carrying an umbrella and his gauge. So, a great character and full of bluster. I suspect if you watch PBS, you know who this man is. Huell Hauser. Most of the people in the book I don't know. Huell actually is one of my oldest friends. And it was, let's see, when was it? Late 70s maybe. I was working in my first job at 20th Century Fox. He marches in, he's working at the Grand Ole Opry, and he had a show he wanted to pitch. And if you've ever met Huell, he's not a hard person to get to like. He's one of the friendliest guys. But he was, in those days, just trying to work his way up, trying to figure out what to do in life. He eventually moved to New York. Our friendship stayed through that period. And then when he moved to Southern California, he was hired to do little 5-minute pieces on CBS Evening News, little happy talk pieces. But what I think makes Huell a dreamer is he very soon got fed up with sort of both the entertainment as well as the sort of news world where it's all about ratings, it's all about pitching yourself in these sort of commercial ways. And his strengths were doing the stories he wanted to do. So what Huell did was something that I still think he's the only one that does this. He went to public television and said, I've got a show, and I will pay for it. I will go to the sponsor, and I will deliver the show. You just need to deliver me airtime. PBS said, if it's a good show, we'd love that idea, right? We don't have to pay for it? Nope. So it goes to Wells Fargo Bank, and over the years, almost all the major California companies have sponsored Huell. So he has his own production company. He has since the late 80s. This year he has 8 shows on the air. Parks, California Gold, Visiting, da-da-da-da-da. He owns them all. He creates them all with he and his cameraman and Louis and, you know, these guys. And he's, put more television time on himself than anyone else in Southern California history. He doesn't do it for the money. He does it because he loves people and he loves to go out. As a friend, one of the biggest treats is when you get a call and he says, all right, we're going out. He won't tell you where, but you know, since he has a whole research staff devoted to finding the cool, underground, fun places in LA, that's going to be a place you want to go. So we'll go out to old restaurants, to the top of some tower that he can get us in on. You never know where it is. And of course, everyone in the restaurant recognizes him before you know it. The table's crowded, people bringing over food. It's a fun evening. And Huell's not like a celebrity who avoids talking to people. You know, he's out there with the people. He likes talking to people. In fact, if you go to his apartment, which is where this was taken, this is on the rooftop of his apartment in Hancock Park. The green is the neon sign that's on the rooftop, and I lit him with a flashlight. But I wanted him sort of over Hollywood. Go to his apartment, and this hasn't changed in the 25 years, whatever he's been in Southern California. All he has is water, and there's no food in his refrigerator. He's never had food in his refrigerator. And you think, God, even the most committed bachelor has some food, right? Leftover something. No, not Huell. Why? His idea of a good evening out is he'll go pick a restaurant. Sometimes he knows it, sometimes he won't. Just walks in, gets a table, likes to be at the bar, and likes to just get to know the bartender, the Salvadorian waiter, the help staff. He just likes to interact with Southern California. And so every meal in Southern California, he eats at some restaurant. He never cooks, except if he's at our house or one of his few friends, then he'll join in the cooking a little bit. But in my bio on it, I got a few good quotes from Huell and put a few other anecdotes. One of my favorites, and it says a lot about his personality, is inevitably, if you're out with Huell, someone will come up and say, what I don't understand is, why is someone with a Tennessee drawl, our main television spokesman for Southern California? And Huell has been asked this question enough. He has a great answer. He says, well, what does a Southern California sound like? The person's thinking. Before they can answer, Huell says, well, is it the Salvadorian accent? Is it the Filipino? Is it the Midwest? Southern California is great because of all the accents. So what's wrong with a Tennessee accent? And the person goes, you're right. And we all, even after 25 years, that accent hasn't changed. So he's smart enough to know people like the drawl. Anyway, great friend and a great dreamer. Whoop, guess that's it. I wanted to just talk about these 4. There's obviously 52 others in the book, and many you will know. There's some famous people, the Billy Wilder, the Frank Gehry, the Simon Rodia, and there's a few who you won't know, and that was deliberate to sort of get us all thinking about, all right, so who are the young dreamers? there's an artist named Gaijin Fuji, whose photo I didn't bring, but Gaijin is a great example of a first-generation Southern California. He blends ancient sort of Japanese gold leaf painting with tagging. He was a member of a gang. Just kind of a great mix. There's a guy named Ben Caldwell, you won't know, who had the chance, African-American, after UCLA, to go into the Hollywood system instead. As a writer-producer, instead decided going to the community was more interesting. And he's run the community center for media in the Limerick Park area and done sort of amazing things with disadvantaged youth in the black community. So Southern California is not just about the people that I've talked about tonight. It's also about these lesser known but just as remarkable people. One other plug, the photography from this book, starting Friday and continuing through January, will be at the Autry. I've got a show of all my work, so hopefully you can drop by and have a peek at it there as well. So that's my spiel, and happy to hear questions and tell you some more stories if you want to hear them. So any questions? Yes.
Yes. I was a little puzzled about your comment about your grandmother, because I always thought of her as a very visionary woman. And you said something that in the 70s, you told her to, like, get with it, Grandma.
Well, I think she was clearly a visionary when it came to sort of culture and what a city needed and how to get there. But in terms of sort of, a woman's role in society, she was an 80-year-old, at that moment in time. She probably didn't have the kind of with-itness, and she's a rich old lady, so I felt that there was a moment I could criticize her and get away with it, which I barely did.
I just wanted to share something interesting. I'm married in the early 50s, and when my middle daughter was starting as a junior at South-Based High, she came home one evening shortly after enrollment and said she was very disappointed that the woodworking shop instructor would not let her into the class. And I said, how come? She said, well, I'm a girl. I said, well, take on working wood. And I said, you go back there tomorrow and you tell him you're going to be in his class. If he still turns you down, he'll have to deal with you. She got in the class.
Yeah.
And he said to her, you're the first girl who ever applied to work in the woodworking.
That's great. Yeah.
Did William Mulholland make your book? Or not?
Yes, very definitely. He was an early choice, and he's such a visionary. He was untrained as an engineer, and yet was responsible for, next to the Panama, the largest engineering project of the early half of the 20th century. So.
How about Franklin Murphy?
Franklin's someone I knew actually pretty well. He was chairman of Times Mirror, obviously head of UCLA. I've read his biography. I liked Franklin a lot. He didn't make the cut. I thought he was, he was a great administrator. He was one of the most patient people as he juggled all the egos of the fundraising world, but I didn't quite see the sort of first level visionary in Franklin. So, yes?
Who were some of the first dreamers that you mentioned? Some of the
Older ones? The oldest is the biggest author of the 19th century, Helen Hunt Jackson, author of Ramona, which I finally read. I mean, most of us have heard of Ramona. How many have read Ramona? It's an amazing book, right? It really holds up. And, her goal, just a quick aside, her goal was not to write a successful book, fiction. Her goal was to help the Native Americans in Los Angeles. And the way she had written this research book that Congress paid her for, and she distributed copies to all members of the Congress with her blood on it. and it was called Century of Dishonor. And nothing happened. No policy change, no bill ever passed. And so she took a page from Harry Beecher Stowe, who had written Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was the big bestseller that talked about, obviously, the slavery in the African American community. And she said, well, if I could do the same for the Indian population. So she wrote this book and never lived to see it published. She died right before publication. And some of the stories of its success, so it's published in 1884-ish. It was so popular, even 2 decades later, Southern Pacific built a rail stop out in what's that valley? Coachella. So they could stop and see the home that inspired Ramona, just because they had so many tourists who were coming across the country whose view of Southern California was Ramona. Here's this kind of idyllic mix of Indian and Spanish cultures, and she really kind of popularized the mission style and all that. Very important, but sadly never got to see the fruits of her success. Yes?
How do you consider yourself a dreamer?
I like to be an innovator. I have changed jobs about every 2.5 years. I've been through many different careers, and I just, you know, as my wife will attest, I have more projects at any one time than anyone should have. My dreams are you know, some have been realized, some are still yet to come. I'm getting, now that I have some time in my life, more involved in some big civic volunteer projects that hopefully will come to fruition. So, but growing up in my family was hard not to just have some kind of a dream. You know, it wasn't asked of us, but it was some kind of unwrittenly expected. So, yes.
Did you have chemists, biological chemists like Linus Pauling, for example?
Linus isn't a Southern Californian, so he wasn't, at least as far as I know. He was up at Stanford when I was there, and but I limited it to Southern Californians.
Where is Caltech?
Caltech's in Southern California.
He was there.
He was he?
Many years.
Yeah, he was up. Yeah, I didn't have him, but he certainly could have been considered. No, I'm aware well of his accomplishments. So yes.
Did Carrie McWilliams have any influence on you in your writing?
I've read what's his famous book, Island and Sun, yeah, which I liked. I mean, he's a good historian. I thought he was fairly biased for its period. I think there were a lot of things I didn't like about it. So, you know, it was part of. There's some quotes from Carrie in the book. So, but you know, I think he sort of missed some of my optimism. I think he concentrated a little bit more on some of the dark side of the dream here.
Like the Owens Valley?
Well, you know, many examples. So, yes?
What was the significance of Buck and her blue car?
Oh, I forgot to tell you that story. So let's go back here. So one of the legacies I have in my family is cars. My father was one of the biggest car collectors, classic cars, muscle cars, everything from 1910 to, you know, the fastest cars. So he had 200 or 300 cars went through his collection. So cars were something I grew up with, and my younger brother was a professional race car driver at Indianapolis. So when I saw this picture, first of all, I don't know what color that car was because it was a black and white. But I have a kind of memory of driving with her in a blue convertible. I don't think it was this car. But if you can read this, it says Weekender. And I thought, Weekender, is that a Mercedes? I mean, so, you know, I looked up, and of course, if you do a Google search, car Weekender, you'll get, 200 million hits. So I couldn't find out what this car was. I wrote to 2 or 3 really good car buffs, people who live in the car collecting world. What's a Weekender? Couldn't tell. So I went to press with the book, couldn't identify the car. And about 2 months ago, someone gave me a coffee table book called Celebrities and Their Cars. And it was a European kind of coffee table book. And I'm flipping through it, and there's Brigitte Bardot sitting in a Weekender. She was the spokesperson for the Simca Weekender. And I'm sure there weren't many of those sold, but I guess my grandma figured if Bardot could do it, she could too. Anyway, that's my little... Yes?
I was actually interested in another literary comparison. Mike Davis's City of Ports is a very specific
Right.
look at dreamers and sort of the dream. And I was curious if you had any comments. It looks like you focus more on the dreaming than the outcome. But
Well, in the biographies, obviously I talk about their accomplishments. So I do talk about their the dreaming. Mike is a great voice for Southern California, a great historian. Again, I would say like Harry McWilliams, I don't agree with everything he writes, and sort of felt my own voice. I didn't want to sort of follow his or anyone else's. He's it's very easy to look at both sides of this, but for this book I really wanted to be an inspirational book rather than a history book. So, yes?
Talk about your grandmother. I think of Sybil Brant.
Yes.
Same background.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't have to do that. She was taken with it.
I don't know a lot about her. One of the things that we're doing in the museum show is, the publisher is liking this book and how it's selling, and we may do another one. So at the museum show, and at any of these talks I write down, we're asking anyone who comes by to suggest dreamers. And there's a website where they're setting up, so anyone from school kids to museum visitors are going to be able to suggest, because I'm sure there's hundreds of people that either should have been in this book or could be in the next book. Sybil Brand, a very good idea. Thanks. Yeah?
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit about the research that you did, or the process that you went through to do research?
Well, I have a reasonably good, call it 60-book collection of Southern California history. So I sort of started there and kind of reread some of those things, and then I went online. And a lot of it was anecdotal, though, because if you do searches on inspirational people, or there's nothing you can kind of, there was no one book I could open and said, this has 10 of the 50 people I'm going to need in it. Some would have 3, others, Kevin Starr's books over their entirety mention many of these people, but they mention 2,000 other people. So it's weeding through that. And that was fun. What was not as fun is contacting some of them and waiting the months to get through to them, and the Frank Gehry's and the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, and those people have layers of people to say no before you can take their portrait. So that was the tough part, actually, was getting to them. Yeah.
How did you come about to sell your book? Did you and how long did it take you to write it? How did you come about to sell it to a publisher, and did you have to go through a book proposal?
I'd written up a short proposal. I actually had this idea for a book called Just Dream City, and I had Dreamers as one of the chapters, one of the 3 sections. And the other sections were about Dream City, so landscape photos of the city, and then a whole section on sort of the unique activities that we do in Southern California that aren't done anywhere else, from the Doodah parades to Lucha Vavoom, one of my favorite. So I've been shooting all these things, and there were only 2 or 3 good local publishers that were recommended to me, and I visited 2 out of the 3, and one of them said yes. And I said, what? And then this is Angel City Press, which is one of the great local publishers. And the editor there, Patty, said, I really think this is more than one book. Let's just focus on Dreamers. And I had, I thought that was a good suggestion, and the more I lived with it, the more I realized it was the right suggestion. Between the research and the getting permission to shoot people, it took 3 years. And longer than I had sort of anticipated. The writing, not being a writer, I mean, I used to write a lot in college, and then I thought emails and PowerPoints constituted writing. And then suddenly you're faced with 50,000 words of biographies, and you go, okay, this is a little bigger task than I was thinking about. So that took a lot longer, and it was fun, but it was time. So.
Did you do it on your word processor or longhand?
No, it was all, I'm a digital guy, so it's all these photos are all digital, manipulated. For instance, I showed you that one. This one, just to show you another photo, Reeves Callaway, whose father was a dreamer. He started Callaway Golf. Reeves runs Southern California's best high-end car manufacturing company. And he does high-end engineering for all the top car companies of the world, but he also makes his own supercars. And here he is driving one of the supercars. Now he's actually sitting parked in a parking lot in Orange County, but I wanted him to be racing. So someone earlier pointed out that he's driving in the middle of the lane, and he wasn't driving at all, actually. So, but it's what is that? I think 6th Street Bridge at dawn. So yeah.
I was wondering why you didn't look like that.
You thought it was me?
Uh-huh.
A lot of people assume that, and that was never my intention. So. Yes?
Who is the quirkiest dreamer that you write about?
Well, Charlie Hatfield, who we talked about, is certainly high on that list. That's a good question. Quirky. Who else is quirky on that list? Let me open the title page, see if I can give an informed answer. Raymond Chandler, perhaps, moved, 30 times in Southern California, never settled down, didn't become his dream didn't start till middle age. Very interesting man. Oh, here's one. In fact, I'll show you her photo.
Did Wallace Stegner make him?
He's not a Southern Californian.
But he's out of that scene, right?
Yeah, but he's really known for Northern California, and I had to do justice. He was a Stanford kind of guy. Where is she? All right, I'll tell you a brief story about her too. Well, here's one who's very quirky. Amy Simple McPherson. Very quirky. Many good stories about her. Probably the most quirky and kind of the most off-the-chart selection that I did was Angeline.
Oh, you found her.
I found her. Now, Angeline is in a town where fame is everything. She's the only one who became famous for just putting billboards up. And at the end, I had to admire that. Working with her was the most interesting. She arrived in full regalia in her hot pink Corvette and hot pink thing. Got up on, I had set up a little backdrop to photograph her. And I took one photo, and she jumped off and said, "How's that?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you only get one photo." And I said, "Well, that's really not how you work with a photographer and a model." She says, no, only one photo. If you want to do another one, you have to delete that one, and I'll let you take another one. And I said, "Really?" And I couldn't believe she was, I said, "You're a model?" I mean, she knew how to pose. She's been posing for decades. But she had this, and I've heard from many people, if you see her on the street, everyone thinks, "Oh, hey, I'm going to get a picture of Angeline." No, you won't, unless you pay her. She works for money. She's the only person in the book I had to pay. I won't tell you, since we're on the web here, how much I had to pay her or how much she asked for, but it's a funny story. So anyway, I said, "Well, look, I've got a few ideas," because I wanted to use her in sort of signature Hollywood backdrops. And I said, I really need you in more than one pose. So I had to pay her another $100, and she would do 2 more poses. So I literally had this whole big studio ready to shoot her. I got 3 pictures. And so I told my publisher, even though I used only 1 picture for everyone, in the introduction I put the other 2 Evangeline, just because I paid for them. Oh yeah.
Can I ask one? Did you include immigrants as you included this gentleman, Hauser, for example, from Tennessee? Did you include immigrants like Charlie Chaplin, Bob Hope, Ruben Mamoulian, these people who came and settled here and became famous here?
Well, I think if I went over the 56, most were immigrants. Very few grew up here. Dorothy Chandler grew up here. Andy Lipkiss grew up here. Most came here from somewhere else. Some from abroad. Many from other parts of the U.S. A word about Hollywood. You mentioned various Hollywood names. Hollywood is actually the hardest subject. I spent 25 years working in the entertainment industry. I knew it well. In one sense, everyone in Hollywood is a dreamer. Everyone wants to do something important, get an award, see their name across the world. So they're dreamers in front of every camera, behind every camera. So how do you choose between Meryl Streep and Charlie Chaplin? I mean, it just seemed an impossible task. So that was the hardest one to sort of think through. And so I did a few things. I chose a few people who were outside of the pure Hollywood system. I chose Greg McGilvery, who runs McGilvery Freeman Films, and not invented the format, but invented how great what the IMAX film is. He's the one that had taken cameras underwater, top of Everest, down rivers. He's really kind of pioneered this spectacle. I chose an acting class of kids who are just starting out, 18-year-old. They've moved here. Parents moved with them. And since then, 2 or 3 of them have done well since they even shot the photo. One was in, what was the vampire movie that was so successful? Twilight. So I went that way. And then I said, okay, I've got to have somebody. And so I thought, well, who represents not just the dreamer, but someone who's really accomplished in multiple ways? So I chose Billy Wilder. Great immigrant, came here to escape the Holocaust, and is the only one who's a writer, director, Academy Award winner in both categories, does comedy, did drama, and won awards for all that. I also have people like Ronald Reagan and Schwarzenegger, who obviously came out of Hollywood, but really went on to kind of springboard to other things. So, how's our time, Amy? Are we
Close.
close? Okay.
As a dreamer, where is your next dream going to take you?
That's a big question. As I said, I'm getting involved in some civic activities. I've got a few more books and maybe some art shows coming up. So I've got some dreams. We'll see where they go. So anyway, thank you all. I guess we're